Thank you for the lovely introduction, Anthony. I'll go ahead and share my screen so we can get started with today's webinar on mental strength. So as Anthony mentioned, we'll be doing this webinar series. Love to have the folks that are able to tune in live, and this will also be available for folks later on. Today's topic will be on mental strength. The plan for today, think of this as sort of the outline for the webinar today, is we'll be discussing the different aspects of mental fitness overall, one of those being mental strengths. We'll discuss why athletes need mental strength. We'll do a short self-assessment on your own mental strength. We'll discuss the benefits of mental strength for athlete populations, and then practical strategies to build mental strength. Last, I'll leave the webinar with some key takeaways on mental strength. Let's get started. So as I discussed, mental fitness is sort of this overall picture of the mental aspect of an athlete or performer's life. We hear a lot about physical fitness, right? And the training that we put in and day out into our sport. But what's often neglected is our mental fitness, which requires a similar level of commitment and development of these strategies over time. So mental toughness is what I think people traditionally think of as mental strength. Mental toughness really allows us in the moment, in more urgent situations, to tune out the distractions, tune out the negative thoughts in the moment, and act with more immediacy. Mental strength, however, the topic of this webinar, is what helps us persevere through challenges in more sustainable ways. So it might happen a little bit more long term than the moment you might need mental toughness. And lastly, mental resilience can also have some overlap with mental strength, but is also really important in the aftermath when recovering from mistakes or setbacks in our lives or our sport. So the key here is that all three of these aspects of mental fitness are really important. We'll just touch on each of these, and the rest of the webinar will be really focused on mental strength. The first, a little bit more on mental toughness. Again, while mental toughness is often interchangeable or used interchangeably with mental strength, it really has its own place. Mental toughness is the thing that helps you stay focused in these really crucial moments of your sport and compartmentalize when needed, like scoring the winning point or goal. But it's not necessarily sustainable in the long term. And this sort of extreme pressure or focus can ultimately damage mental health in the long term. So really important to develop mental toughness for the in the moment use and strategies, but we need something else in the long term. Now, mental toughness, again, some overlap with mental strength, but is often these tasks that you might hear about in sports psychology, like positive self-talk in the moment, controlling your anxiety or arousal in the moment, visualizing the outcomes of your performance, setting attainable goals, and maintaining your attention in sport. So mental toughness is important and has its place, but it's not necessarily the same thing as mental strength or mental resilience. On to mental strength, and I have a little visitor in the webinar today. So mental strength is not necessarily your short-term emotions like doubt, irritation, frustration, sadness. That happens with most of us in a sport context. But really what mental strength is your long-term coping skills in the face of these emotions. So when you're faced with the doubt, the frustration, whatever it may be, it's how we maintain our resiliency, our self-awareness, and our adaptability in sport. It's really what's defined on this slide here is it's the set of cognitive and emotional skills that you can pull out in moments of high stress when we're facing difficult circumstances in our lives. And it really gives us the ability to function in the face of these challenges without sacrificing our own health and well-being. So some of this might happen sort of in the short term, but often needs to take place in a little bit more long term, a little bit more sustainable ways than something like mental toughness might need to be. Now, lastly, mental resilience. This is what really provides us with the ability to recover, rest and recover from things like stress and difficult events after they take place, after they happen. It essentially allows us to return to the pre-crisis status, right? Or your level of functioning prior to that crisis or that event. It allows us to get back to that place more quickly and back on track. Importantly, and this is something I think a lot of athletes I work with forget, is that it really emphasizes the importance of rest and recovery. In the same ways that we would rest and recover from our physical fitness after a competition or a hard practice, we don't always recognize the need to do that in mental ways as well. So it recognizes that need for rest and recovery, especially after significant life events or challenges in sport, which is not always the priority of things like like mental strength and certainly mental toughness. Now, ultimately, we've touched on the three different aspects of mental fitness. We've got mental toughness, mental strength, and mental resilience. And this overall picture among athletes just requires the development of all of these skills and the recognition of maybe when you need to pull each out in the moment, when it might be most appropriate. Now, as mentioned, the remainder of today's webinar is going to be really focused on mental strength and how we build mental strength skills, why athletes need them, the benefits of them, and strategies to improve our mental strength. To start with, why do we need this? Why is it important at all to talk about mental strength in a sport context? So as many of you tuning in this webinar know already, like athletes operate under extremely high levels of stress and pressure all of the time through much of their careers. So sometimes athletes can feel like, I can handle absolutely everything that comes in my way. Everything that I face, I can handle all of that socially, academically, athletically, in our families, whatever it might be. And sometimes we feel like even the smallest stressors or setbacks can feel really overwhelming and almost unbearable. The difference in these two scenarios is what we call mental strength. Mental strength is ultimately what protects us from the latter, from feeling derailed or overwhelmed by negative thoughts and life stressors, which we're all going to face at some point in our careers. So thinking of mental strength can be helpful as a mental muscle, right? Mental fitness. It's a muscle that we have to invest in and develop over time. So it's really ready to navigate through these life stressors and challenges when they come up. A really great importance here is that mental strength doesn't mean that you'll never cry, you'll never have doubts or experience mental health concerns. I think that's a big misconception of mental toughness in particular. Like in the moment, mentally tough, you need to compartmentalize, set those things aside, and handle the task at hand. Mental strength is a little bit more in the long term, right? It allows that space and that capacity to feel the things that you're feeling as you navigate through these situations. So the truth is, many people who have experienced life setbacks or mental health concerns have actually developed really high levels of mental strength because they've learned coping skills and built support systems that help them navigate through these concerns when they arise. So really want that to be an important takeaway today. We're going to do a brief mental strength self-assessment, and this is a good time to remind folks that the Q&A is available for questions. So you can throw your questions in that Q&A. I will answer each of those at the end of the webinar. So at any point in any of these slides, if you have a question or a thought that pops up, throw that in the Q&A, and then we'll have some designated time to answer those questions at the end. So I want everyone to take a moment and kind of just sit, relax, and really focus on the words that I'm saying. You're going to think about your own life as an athlete, but also just as a person in the difficult situations you may have faced in your life. I want you to think about the answer to this question. How do you personally respond to negative emotions? When you feel sad, when you feel frustrated, how do you respond to those emotions? Do you sit with them? Do you accept them? Do you act out? Do you feel overwhelmed? And similarly, how do you respond to life challenges? So when things present in maybe your personal life, how do they affect you? How do you respond? Do they impact your sport? Do they impact your relationships? How do you respond when difficult situations arise in your life? To think even further, when these situations arise, do you problem solve? Do you look for solutions? Do you seek advice from other people in your life? Or do you panic and react really quickly and maybe react on those emotions? And the last question is, can you let things go? So negative emotions and life challenges arise. How long do you stay there? We never expect anyone to let go of things right away, but how long do you stay in that place before you're able to accept the experience, accept the emotion, and let things go and move on? Now, as you participated in this self-assessment, if you found yourself saying, like, I really don't respond well, or I could probably respond a little bit better, this might tell you that mental strength is an area that you could strengthen. Nobody does these things perfectly. No one is perfectly mentally strong all the time. But if you found yourself being like, yes, this is an area I could improve in my life, might be a sign that it's time to work with a mental coach, work with a sports psychologist, do some work around that area of your life in particular. Thank you for participating in that self assessment. Now, importantly, what are the benefits of mental strength? If I'm going to ask you to work on this area of your life, you probably want to know, how would it benefit me? How would it change my life? Number one is it helps us manage anxiety. Anxiety is such a natural part of sport, performance anxiety, general anxiety. We need a certain level of anxiety to be motivated, to care, to take care of the task at hand. So anxiety is not a bad thing. Now, what it can sometimes turn into is things like negative thoughts, right? And mental strength helps us reframe these anxious thoughts into what it's trying to tell us, right? Is this an important task? Do I care about this? Versus something that's debilitating. Helps us push through by preparing for the task at hand rather than feeling kind of paralyzed by that anxiety. Similarly, helps us reduce the overall stress we face in our lives. So it might make you feel less stressed by everyday challenges that present themselves. And there's a lot, especially if you're a student athlete, you've got school, relationships, sport, everything going on. Makes you feel less stressed by all those things coming at you every day. Helps you see adversity or challenge as opportunities. And it helps us reframe some of these thoughts and these challenges of, how do we find solutions? How do we problem solve versus feeling overwhelmed by them? Enhances motivation is number three, which is huge for athletes, is maintaining motivation for all the things we got going on every day can be hard, especially, middle of a season, end of a season, end of semesters, things like that. So it helps us maintain that motivation, helps us maintain a high locus of control, which is this belief that, like, we have control over our circumstances and the way that we respond. So then we keep trying, we keep growing, and we keep looking for solutions rather than externalizing it. And lastly, what mental strength really does is it helps us increase our discretion, right? Helps us improve our ability to decide which thoughts do we listen to and which thoughts do we let go of. So, which thoughts are trying to tell me something, right? And then I act on that versus which thoughts aren't really helpful or beneficial at all and I let go of them. Allows us to stay focused in the moment despite others that may disagree, right? So maybe you're having challenges and sometimes we're not going to agree with everyone. It allows us to decide, what do I really need to resolve and focus on here, and what do I need to move forward from? So the last couple really important benefits of mental strength, not as much about kind of the mental health side, is focus. It really helps us, maintain that focus and be courageous in the face of challenges or distractibility. So there's less fear of failure. We're certain we can survive just about anything that we face, right? Even the worst case scenario. If you're telling yourself, I can survive even this, helps us focus on that process rather than the outcomes. And that's huge in sport. Being able to stay in the moment, be courageous throughout that process, and not become distracted or debilitated by the outcome. Last benefit, but this certainly isn't exhausted, of mental strength is adaptability. So it makes us more able to look for solutions and problem solve versus dwelling on maybe what's not going well or what's not perfect. Allows us to be creative in identifying these potential solutions and being open to change. Now that I hope I've sold you on the benefits of mental strength and why it's important to incorporate into your daily lives, let's talk about some actual strategies to build mental strength. Now, the key here is that, mental fitness requires daily habits, just like physical fitness. We're in the training room, working on our sport and our fitness nearly every day. We need to do something similar for building our mental strength. These daily habits allow us to just be mentally tough in key moments and mentally strong when we face life stressors. So, mindfulness is a huge one in sport. If you haven't heard this already, I'd be a little surprised. But mindfulness really allows us to recognize and respond to emotions by slowing down, being in the present moment, and not judging ourselves. We respond more appropriately, right? Rather than reacting to emotion in the moment. Just think of it as like your emotion regulation skills, things like meditation, breathing, relaxation. All of that slows down our nervous system. So we're really able to think through our response rather than react on emotion. Journaling, also big in sport, helps to keep tabs on your daily habits. Find the strategy that works best for you, whether that's free writing. Some people just write at the end of the day. Some people do goal setting and check in on how they're doing with those goals each day, or reviewing situations where you've been mentally strong or areas you wanted to be mentally stronger. Journaling is a really independent and unique practice. You have to find what works best for you. Goal setting, on that note, can set clear, attainable goals and regularly revisit them, either with a support person, on paper, or whatever that may be. Gives you a sense of direction, purpose, and motivation by revisiting these goals. Importantly about goals is, one, they need to be aligned with your values. You need to care about them. They need to be consistent with the direction you want to go in your life. And two, they need benchmarks. So you need to know how you make progress, regularly determine and check in on if that progress is being made. Practicing self-compassion. This one is huge and also tough in sport. Is not often are we told we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace and self-compassion, but what we find is we're actually more productive and successful when we criticize ourselves less. So instead, being self-compassionate, it helps us build that resilience piece that we talked about when things haven't gone well, when mistakes have been made. Helps us just focus on what we have done well in the face of setbacks, maintains a growth mindset, keeps us moving forward. A good one is stepping outside of your comfort zone. It can be really common for athletes to kind of just do the same thing every day and go through the motions, but stepping out of our comfort zones, facing your fears and anxieties by trying new things or conversations, it gives you the evidence that you are more adaptable than you think, right? It gives you that proof that you can face new and novel challenges. This can look like learning new skills, joining a new club or a group, or having difficult conversations that you've been putting off. Strengthening our support systems, so important for our mental strength, and actively maintaining these social support networks, investing your time with people and doing fun activities. It gives us balance, allows us to find that balance that protects us from life stressors. People that give us encouragement, feedback, and guidance are really important in our lives to navigate life challenges. And lastly, of course, have to mention working with a professional like a Mindflow coach can help you focus intentionally on your mental strength. You might do an assessment of your current mental strength and identify areas you want to improve. But it really gives us support in recognizing our mental strength blind spots. What are we maybe not seeing? And a source of accountability for daily habits that we want to create over time. Now, some key takeaways before we open it up to some questions. One is that, again, it's important to remember that building mental strength is a near daily journey. So think of how many days, again, you spend working on, your physical strength, aspects of your sport or your physical fitness. Mental strength sort of has to be approached in the same way to be effective and sustainable. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to, sit down for 2 hours a day and work on their mental fitness, but if you're not doing anything now, start with 5 minutes a day. Start with a couple minutes before you lift, your workout, your practice, and see how that works for you. Now, if you haven't actively invested into your mental strength right away, it's going to take some time and practice to develop those skills. You got to be patient with yourself and accountable. Can't count the amount of times I've had someone come back to me and said, like, well, that didn't work, right? Well, how many times did you try it? Under what kind of circumstances? Did you hold yourself accountable? Did you give it more than 1 week, right? So give yourself some time and patience and accountability as well. What we know about any kind of skill we want to start or goal we want to achieve is sharing it with somebody else makes it more likely for it to be achieved. So maybe you've got a teammate who wants to do something similar with their mental strength. Maybe you have a close relationship with a coach or an athletic trainer or a strength and conditioning coach. Share what you're working on with them so they can help hold you accountable. And lastly, as I emphasized earlier in the webinar, it's equally important to recognize that increasing your mental strength does not mean that you'll stop having difficult emotions or facing negative emotions. It's instead how you respond in the face of these challenges. It might help to start with a self-assessment on your own, right? In the face of difficult experiences and difficult emotions, do you panic? feel overwhelmed and retreat, isolate? Or do you actively problem solve, reach out to your sports system, or seek professional assistance when needed? That might help you understand where you're at today. So with that, great time to open it up to some Q&A from the audience.
Yeah, so we've got a couple good questions in the queue currently, but while we're going through these that we currently have in hand, feel free to send a couple more in the chat. I'm sure if you have a question, another attendee has a similar question. So the first one, Dr. Kilwein, is when would be the best time for athletes to start working on their mental strength?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anthony. Now, so never too late, right? If you're already doing that, great. Never a bad time to kind of reassess and check back in on how you're doing. What things might you want to add, change, modify? And if you've never done this, it's never too late, right? So it is not uncommon for me to be working even with a professional athlete and they've never visualized, right? But what I tell everyone is start now and start small. Start with one thing at a time. A lot of college athletes get really excited about different things that might increase their performance and want to try a whole bunch of different things. That's great. I love the energy, but then we don't know what works and we don't know the effect that things have. So pick one thing, try that for a period of time, see if it works for you, check in with other people in your life and see if it's having an outcome, and then try something else or make changes if you need to.
Love it. This is another good question that honestly I wish I would have had the answer to when I was an athlete. So, why do I feel like my mental strength varies? For instance, when we do hard workouts or conditionings, I feel very mentally strong. However, in a high pressure situation, in games, for instance, I feel like I crumble.
Yeah, that's such a good question. What I encourage people to think about is what is internal, what is you, and what is external, what's the environment, what's the things around you, right? I have so many athletes that say, well, like I am different or I perform differently, but it's actually just our response to the environment. So when there's less pressure or, we know everyone there, we're on our home court, things like that, the only thing that changes from a different environment is all those external things. It's our thoughts and our strength and us telling ourselves that things are different when they're not. So remind yourself, bring yourself back to that present moment and ask yourself, what is actually different from when I'm doing really well in my workouts and my fitness to when I'm in game time? And it's not you. It's not your skill. It's not your preparation. It's not your training. That stays consistent. It's your mindset, the way you think about things that changes in those environments. So again, a good place to start is just to when that comes up in competition, remind yourself, nothing changed. I am consistent. I am still here.
All right, next one. What are some good journaling prompts?
Yes, this is a great question. If you're a free writer in journaling, that's great and do that, but I recognize that a lot of people are not and want some structure. So what I actually tell people to do, two options, three and three. One, three good things is this sort of idea that at the end of the day, if you focus on three good things that you played an active role in, that helps improve our compassion, our gratitude, and kind of just settle in the day, right? So you can't say the weather was good today. You've got to say, the weather was great, so I went on a walk with my friends, or I had a really good, practice in the nice weather, right? So at the end of the day, three good things that happen in that day for you. That's a good practice. When it comes to athlete specific, three intentions. So maybe in the night before or the morning, you might set three intentions for the next day. And then that night, revisit. How did I do with those three intentions? So, we don't want to do 100 different things in our journals, and one might not be enough. So, find a prompt that's three things, three good things that happen, three goals, three intentions you want to set, and revisit that consistently. And then you can add things from there.
Love it. On to the next. How do you describe or present mental fitness to mental strength in a group setting / to a team? Tools for helping with a team's mental strength. Great
Yeah,
question.
another great one. I just do my best to compare it as much as I can to physical fitness, physical strength, right? So we've got a lot, when we talk about mental health or anxiety or things like that, people get a little bit spooked still. And I think that's natural. A lot of that's changing. But the more that we can relate the mental aspect of the game to the physical aspect of the game, it feels more approachable to people, right? So if I am in a setting, I'm going to, say, how many hours a week are we dedicating to our fitness, right? And that's every day. Maybe you got one off day, right? But like we're spending a lot of time devoted to physical fitness, and then our actual training, our practice, right? And if we take just even a piece of that and devote that to our mental fitness, we're going to notice changes. Another way I frame it is that, every athlete that you're competing with or against uh, is very skilled. They're very fit, they're very skilled, they're putting all this time in. We all got the same 20-ish hours a week that we're devoting to sport. What can give you that edge and that 1%, 2% edge over those other athletes are things like mental fitness, because not everybody's doing it. Your nutrition, your fitness, your sleep, things like that. Everyone is working hard, everyone's putting their hours in, but how can you give yourself that one edge is a good way to frame it.
One thing to add to that, Dr. Kilwein, is it's ironic because you ask individuals, whether it's coaches or athletes, and say, how much of your sport is mental? And more often than not, you don't hear anything less than 70%, yet you question them, how much of your day-to-day are you spending on that? So that's always something I always like to bring up. And I heard that example and I was like, that's a really, really good point.
Yeah,
This next one is fantastic, and I know it applies to everyone here. I find myself saying, I can't do XYZ mid-match during
mm,
competition. What's the best way to eliminate or limit that inner dialogue?
yeah. So that's just a classic example of negative self-talk, right? And when we're in these high pressure moments, like an actual match or a competition, negative self-talk is going to be the strongest. We see it in practice, but again, there's not as much riding on that. So the best way to manage your negative talk is to respond to it and start to replace it with positive self-talk. This is the huge one I'm working with athletes on, and they'll come back the next way and they'll say, well, I still thought I couldn't do it. It's going to take more than a week to sort of, challenge and replace some of those thoughts. So don't judge yourself for having the negative thought that I can't do this. That's natural. That's an automatic thought. That's going to come in and we can't control that. It's how do you respond to it or what do you do next, right? So you can do two things. One, you can accept that I had that thought and that doesn't make it true and move forward. Just because you think I can't do this doesn't make it true. Accept that it took place, be mindful, and move forward. Second thing you can do is actually challenge and replace that thought in the moment with something positive. So instead of, I can't do this, I can do this. I prepared for this. I'm ready for this. This is an opportunity, and reframe it. Might work different for people in different scenarios. Some of us are good at that accepting and moving forward, and some of us need to take a little bit more practice. But really, what happens in a competition moment is that self-doubt creeps in these quick moments where there's just a little bit of time to think. So let's replace that time with alternative thoughts like positive self-talk, daily practice, do it and practice consistently before competition so it's easier to pull out.
Great. Another one, how can I effectively balance understanding the challenges student athletes face, like tough practices, academic struggles, or personal issues, with guiding them to develop mental toughness and resilience for life?
Yeah, this is every staff person that works with college athletes, right? It's like there's got to be a balance. So the key is balance. And I tell people, like, look at your day and let's say you got 100 pieces in the day, like 100%, right? So if you got 100 pieces, it's just not possible to put 100% into your practice, 100% into your academics, 100% into your personal issues at every given moment. So each moment we kind of have to reprioritize. What do I need to focus on in this moment? What can wait till tomorrow? What can wait till 2 hours from now? But a good practical tool you can ask is, in that moment, let's say a student athlete is facing challenges, you might have to ask yourself, what do they need in terms of mental fitness in this moment? Do they need to be mentally tough? Are they in the middle of a competition or a practice and that thing has to be compartmentalized? Do they need mental resilience? Do they need some acknowledgement of that pain and that suffering and be asked, like, what do you need to move through this? How can we support you move through this? Or do they need some mental resilience? Do they need some rest and recovery? Do they need a break from practice, whatever it might be? You have to reevaluate in every given moment. Like, do they need to be tough? Do they need to be strong? Or do they need to be resilient? Ask for their input in that, and then that might help guide to your decision making. Even more importantly is that you're not going to do it perfectly every time. We don't always know what our student athletes need, and the student athletes themselves don't always know what they need. And so we might think they need some tough lessons in that moment and realize, dang, they really needed some rest, right? Or the opposite, that, we give them some rest and realize maybe they actually needed a little strength and like some strategies to move through this. Not going to do it perfectly. Try and make the decision with the best information you have, collaborate with other people that you have available, and that's the best we can do.
Awesome. Next one, for those struggling with motivation in their sport, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah. This is a tough one. Again, at certain times of the year, times of the season, you might find yourself struggling more with motivation than other times. My number one is to recognize that that happens. Does not mean that you've lost your passion or your drive for your sport. I have a lot of folks come to me and say, well, I'm just not feeling motivated. Does that mean it's time to step back from my sport? And it could be a underlying sign of something different, right? That means you need to leave your sport, but often it's just a normal part of our sport and our athletic experience. So normalize that, remind yourself of why, the why that you're doing this sport. I think we lose sight of that. It can be a really good time for journaling or using a support system is having someone remind you of your why. So why do you do this really hard thing despite these long days, these long practices, the soreness, the lack of sleep? Remind yourself of the why. Why do you do it? Can be helpful to stimulate positive memories of sports. Let's, do a visualization. Tell me about a time that sport really brought you some joy, right? We have this tendency, our thoughts, to think of all the negative or the things that aren't going well. Give yourself an opportunity to at least think of the positive and see that other side before you make any drastic decisions.
Perfect. That's a great technique. I love that. On to the next. How important is self-talk with mental strength, and how can we keep the voice in our head positive?
Yeah. This one is really important for, I think, both mental toughness and mental strength, but might look different between the two. So mental toughness is, again, these brief moments in actual competition or actual practice, right? That like you don't have a lot of time. I think it's crucial, right? And so in that moment, let's say you got to score a goal or make a basket. What you're saying to yourself is, I can't do this. I'm not prepared. That is going to have an impact on the outcome of what you're trying to do. So in that moment, I think it's super important for everyone to have at least like one cue, one thing that you say to yourself in those moments. Um, Now, in the longer term, things like mental strength, how do we keep that voice in our head positive? Recognize it's not going to be 100%. Accept when you have some negative emotions, accept that that's part of anything that's important, and then engage in a regular practice of looking at the positive side of it, being positive with yourself. So that's where the journaling prompt of like three good things removes yourself a little bit from sport, right? It's like mentally tough in the moment. You need something that motivates you for the sport. But if you're just finding yourself maybe being negative or not feeling so good more the long term or generally, that's how we make change that voice is look at what are the good things that actually happen? What are the good things that I actually did? So we're not just filtering out all the positive and microscoping the negative.
Next question, absolutely going to pertain to everyone on this call and everyone around those individuals. Any specific techniques in working with athletes in high pressure situations, penalty kicks, free throws, overtime, or athletes in high pressure positions, quarterbacks, goalies, pitchers? Great question.
Yes. So there's just no way to mention them all, but I'm going to share three. One, visualization. So if you just can't replicate that situation in practice in the same ways. If you need to do a penalty kick or make a free throw, there might be some pressure, but it's your teammates, it's your coaches, it's your own gym, things like that. You need to replicate that as much as you can in practice, and then also visualize what's that going to be like, in a stadium full of somebody else's fans, on a court full of like people are yelling at you and you're making the free throw, right? So replicate those high pressure situations as much as you absolutely can in practice, and then do some visualization of that. Different ways to do it. One, how do I do that positive outcome? Visualize yourself actually making that kick or that free throw. Visualize that positive experience. And two, like visualize yourself when you're not doing well and how do you bounce back from that? So I really think visualization is an important practice for anyone that plays like an individual sport or has these kind of specific situations. You've got to visualize as much as you can. So in the moment, it's easier to pull out strategies. Two is some type of mental reset or focus cue. So that would be in these moments where you need to compartmentalize everything else and focus on the task at hand. What is that cue? What is that reminder to your brain that you need to be locked in that moment? It's individual for everybody. And so this is something I do a lot with tennis players in particular is like you've got to have a reset. When you find yourself drifting and you need to make your serve or you need to bring yourself back into the match, what is that mental reset? You say it enough, you practice enough, it tricks your brain to tell you like this is the most important thing in the moment. So some mental resets might be something like lock in, next one, focus, right here, right now, things like that. Now, you can't come to someone the day before a match and be like, hey, I need this mental reset, right? It's something you got to practice consistently and practice in competition. So you build that habit over time. Mental resets, visualization, and then I would argue that a little bit of self-talk is probably pretty important here. If you're a person who gets up to the line, or over time and you're never anxious and you're just excited, great, you probably don't need that. But a lot of us have some self-doubt, some negative self-talk that presents itself there of like, what if I can't handle this pressure? What if I can't make it? There's so much riding on this. You need to have a script. You need to flip the script and have something that you can say to yourself that's really positive and motivating for that position. Visualization practice, mental resets, positive self-talk are three good ones. They take practice. You can't throw that in like right in the moment. You've got to practice and develop that up until that moment.
And shameless plug here, but on our website, we have a guided visualization. So if it's a student athlete's first time trying to visualize those moments, it's a lot harder said than done. So it's sport agnostic. You can go on our website, it's free. Click on there, plug in your headphones, and it's 8.5 minutes, and they'll walk you through kind of that process. So again, just another resource to add to your toolbox. On to the next. Can you explain if positive thoughts always equal being able to do it?
Yeah. No, right? Just because we think something doesn't make it true, if we think a negative thought, it doesn't make it true. It's the same thing. So just because we think something positive doesn't mean that we're going to do it. However, it does improve our likelihood, right? So we have research on, if we are more confident, if we are more positive, if we believe in ourselves, we are more likely to achieve that goal. So I can't say it's 100%, if I say I don't know, I could say I'm gonna play a sport and go make 20 buckets. Probably not gonna happen at my age, right? But if you're staying positive and your goals are realistic, that might be the key, right? You want to be positive, but you also want to be realistic. What we know is that setting moderately difficult goals are actually the best way to do it. We want to be a little more than average at all times, right? But if we set these unrealistic goals we're never going to reach, it doesn't do anything for us. So positive thoughts always help, but they don't ever guarantee an outcome? That's a great question.
Alrighty. As we talk about the athletes, what are some ways parents can play a part, if they can, in helping with the mental strength of their child?
Yeah. This is awesome. I love working with parents because I think the habits do start there in the way that we talk to our athletes, coaches, anyone that talks to young athletes. That's kind of how they develop their own scripts of how do they talk to themselves and things like that. So, one is like be positive all the time. I think that's really hard, right? Is like it's really important to recognize when our athletes do something well because that reinforces that behavior over time. So when you catch an athlete doing well in performance, like they make a goal, we tend to clap and celebrate them, right? But what if someone helps a teammate? Or what if they celebrate in a positive way? Or what if they make a mistake and bounce back? We need to celebrate and reinforce those things too. So anytime someone does something mentally well, they're mentally strong, they demonstrate that ability, let's reinforce that. I'm so proud of you. That was so awesome. I'm glad to see you doing that. I think that's kind of a big thing is reinforcing the good behavior versus punishing the negative behavior because they're already being hard on themselves. And then that makes it really tough to stay strong in those moments. So reinforcing the good things and then being a support system, giving them some advice, giving them some alternative solutions on might help they navigate a difficult situation, that can be helpful too.
Great. We've got a couple left, so thank you all for these incredible questions. Are there particular theoretical frameworks you lean on when discussing mental strength with athletes?
Yeah. I don't think there's one right theoretical framework, so I want to emphasize that. I think anyone who works with athletes is some eclectic version of everything that they've learned and experienced. My original kind of training was in cognitive behavioral work, which for me is I look at, okay, the way that you think, the way that you feel, and the way that you act, right? And so if you're acting in really negative ways or destructive ways to yourself, you have to ask yourself, what is the feeling driving that? So maybe it's shame, maybe it's anger, maybe it's sadness, and then you act in a certain way. And then take one more step back and looking at the thought. What is the story in your head? What is the way that you are talking to yourself? If you're talking in really negative ways, or you're saying, like, I hate this sport, or I'm never going to make it, or I can't do this, of course, you might show up with a poor attitude, or you might not be performing well. Your behavior is going to reflect those thoughts. So for me, I really do emphasize in my work with student athletes of like, let's figure out what's going on in that head. Let's figure out the way that you're talking to yourself, the way that you're thinking, the story that you're telling yourself. I think that's a good kind of easy framework. And the other one I lean on a lot is something called motivational interviewing. So that is just this really collaborative kind of spirit and style that I'm not the expert in the room, right? I trust that the student athlete or the athlete I'm working with is the expert on their own experience. And in some way, they're going to tell me what they need, even if they don't quite understand it yet, right? So I approach a lot of these conversations with curiosity, assessment, what has worked well for you in the past that might work well in this moment. Leaning into ambivalence of like, I recognize this is probably the thing that would help me, but I don't have the time or the energy. I don't want to do it. Further exploring that. So, looking at the thoughts and being really collaborative are two keys that I approach when I work with athletes.
Good question. All right, one final one to bring us home. What are some methods that can help to move from panic mode reaction to
Yeah.
problem solver?
Yes. Oh, this one is tough, right? Especially you're in the moment and it's easy to react off emotion, but I would say a stop skill is what comes to mind. So anyone who does some DBT work, which is sort of a version of CBT, there's this stop skill, and what it tells us to do is stop. So before you act in that moment, stop, even if it's for a second, right? Even if you're in competition mode. S, stop. Two, take a step back. Maybe that's physically take a step back, or just in our mind, take a step back. O, observe the situation in front of you, really try and understand what's going on. And then the last one is proceed mindfully. So what we usually do is we just act. Something happens and then we panic and then we act, right? Stop tells us to, hey, stop, take a step back, look at the situation and proceed in a really mindful way. Look at alternative solutions, ask people for alternative solutions. And of course, this is going to depend on the situation. If you're in the middle of a competition and you're panicking, right, and you need to problem solve, you're not going to have as much time, but at least stop and give yourself a moment to think. If there's two choices, what's the better one here? You're not going to be perfect. If you have more time, again, stop, take a step back, analyze all of the different options or solutions that might be, get information from other people, and then proceed mindfully.
Great. Well, thank you all, not only for your time, but those incredible questions. I mean, those alone were fantastic prompts for Dr. Kilwein and everything along those lines. Dr. Kilwein also mentioned this at the beginning and want to make a second note of it. This is recorded and it will be uploaded to our website, which is, again, thisismindflow.com. So if you need to refer back to any of these techniques or any of the insightful answers that Dr. Kilwein gave, it'll be on our website. So you can always go back to it. But Dr. Kilwein, I'll let you have closing remarks. I at least like to just throw that in there.
Awesome. Thank you. And just want to echo, thank you everyone for being here. I hope you learned at least one thing from this webinar. And, key takeaways again, this takes daily practice. If you want to be a more mentally strong athlete, start working on that tonight, start working on that tomorrow, start journaling, start doing one of these techniques. And two, remember that mental strength does not equate that we don't feel our emotions, that we're not present, that we're not emotional beings in our lives. And if you want more information, check out some resources online. And thanks for being here.
All right, guys. We'll see y'all next time. Be well.